former US Congressman and former US presidential candidate Ron Paul. Great to have you on, as always, Ron. It's a situation that seems to be really splitting opinion now. The countries are lining up on either side of this debate. But importantly, Nicolas Maduro still has, it seems, the backing of the army. How difficult will it be to oust him?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I don't think he's going to walk away easily, and I think it's going to end up in violence and could have a civil war. Some countries are lining up with him, but we've been antagonizing and threatening him and decide that we're going to install a president for them. And I would think even the people that might not like Maduro shouldn't like us settling the dispute. It's internal. They should settle it. And I think it's rather ironic for our government to say that they want to take care of Venezuela because they're not democratic, and we have to take care of it by, authoritarian approach of us installing a president and having a coup and threaten them with military violence because they're not democratic enough. I would hardly say that our position is very democratic.
Yeah, the irony is quite thick, isn't it, using undemocratic methods to impose a leader in a country they say is undemocratic. What do you think, and let's be fair, it's not just the US, there are several other Western countries lining up to side with the opposition leader, Juan Guaido. Should they not be considering the impact of what they are saying? As you said, this could lead to violence in the country. People might die just because of this political rhetoric. Shouldn't they be bearing this in mind?
Oh, they should, but they have to look at the other side of the equation. The other side of the equation is, the Lima Group. Most of them probably are getting money from us, and we can threaten them too, or put on sanctions. So I think it's the pressure that's put on them, and they come along. And I don't think they sit there and think, oh yeah, no, this is going to have civil strife, and we're going to lose some of our people, because they probably have no intention of sending troops in there. I think it'll be a civil strife, and it'll be CIA and special forces and other countries doing the same thing. But I think they dream that they can, support the United States without a loss of life, and that it will be settled that way. But I think they're fooling themselves, because all we have to do, if somebody wonders what could happen, is they ought to look at U.S. foreign policy the past 10 years or so. More recently, and what's happened in Syria, what has happened earlier on with Iraq and Afghanistan, and Libya. I mean, every time we go in and say, well, you need help, you need to be Americanized, you need to know our good values, and we want you to learn what democracy is all about, and we'll give you a little money too if you obey us. It's always that little tease, but it just violates completely and totally the position that I hold and the Ron Paul Institute holds, and that is nonviolence, or not getting involved, non-interventionism. It's not our business. I'm sure there's some harm done by Maduro and others, but where is it our job? Where do we get the moral authority to be the decider and say, you are worse than the southern side, and that's why we're going to do it? Sometimes I wonder whether it's not a coincidence that Russia looks like they're going to mine some gold there. It's not a coincidence that Venezuela might be important, because they have a little bit of oil there too. So those are the motivations you never hear about, and they get a lot of people to go along. Yes, we are, the United States, a great nation, and we've had good values, and therefore we have the moral authority and responsibility to take care of bad dictators. But I think it leads only to trouble, and that's what we work on trying to prevent these unnecessary interventions.
Germany said that it will recognize Guaido. It's going to join that club on his side as president if a fair and legitimate election isn't held. What was the problem with the most recent election? Why are so many people saying it wasn't free and fair?
In Venezuela, well, people said the resistance, Guaido and his group didn't even attend. They sort of boycotted it. But that's an internal problem. But that doesn't mean that if there were some infractions, that doesn't mean that all of a sudden we know what is best, and what we're doing is we're finding the truth, and we pick Guaido, and we're going to put him, and he's the president. So yes, there are problems down there, probably on both sides, and that's so often is the case when there's a breakdown like this, because Economically speaking, I've been strongly critical of, the economic policy of Venezuela, saying that it would lead to political problems, and that's why I'm so much opposed to government control of the economy, because it usually leads to impoverishment, and certainly I've always argued the case you end up with inflation, and they certainly have all these things, and it's food for fodder for the people who want to rebel and claim power. So it didn't just happen this past week. It's been going on for a while, and it's not like we've never paid any attention to them, because we have been involved behind the scenes for a while now in almost all the countries in South America.
Ron, you talked about the US sending the special forces in. If the big Western complaint is that there wasn't a free election, why don't they send the special forces in and hold an election and allow Maduro and Guaido to both run in it? Why don't they do it that way instead of sending in the special forces and seizing power and then handing it over?
Because it's none of our business, and we don't have the authority, and we can't force it, and there are laws, if you pay any attention to international law, and it's not even in our Constitution, because special forces going in and doing this is an act of war. We're invading and saying we're taking over, and the Congress hasn't had a say on this. So, and the other thing is the practical thing. It doesn't work. It makes things worse for us to get in. There's nothing like foreign occupation that unifies the people, because even some who have been against Maduro may well, say, well, yeah, well, we want to settle this dispute. We don't need the Americans to come in. What do they know that we don't know? So it's something that is unwise, very dangerous. It will be costly. It's against our rules. And if they pretend that that we have to go in because we want to spread American values, those aren't my values. As a matter of fact, they defy what I believe are American values, and that is that we shouldn't be invading other countries and running off coups, and the hypocrisy of it all. When you look at us criticizing others who have been involved, but when we do it, it's right and proper and almost holy.
US National Security Advisor John Bolton used the phrase troika of tyranny, I guess that's the new axis of evil, to describe Venezuela, Cuba and Nicaragua. Is that going to be is that the new tactic to say, hey, there's a country, looks a bit unstable, it's got lots of oil, let's call it poisonous, go in and assist it?
Well, it's all noise, because it doesn't offer any solution, and it just perpetuates the problem, endorses the idea that we should be involved in making these decisions and we should threaten people. I've claimed our problem is they won't accept my suggestion that we be non-interventionists. What they say is if we tell people what to do, and they do it, well, we give them a lot of money. We give them foreign aid and all these kind of things, wonderful things. But if they don't, they're going to get sanctions put on them, and they're going to be threatened, and then it will lead to violence, and then we want to overthrow governments. I just don't buy this thing that the policy that we're following is a good example of American values.
The US has requested a UN Security Council meeting on Venezuela. It's one thing for all these countries to, just say it to journalists that we support the opposition leader, but to actually go into the UN, sit down and make this official, it's documented, it's on paper, that's another thing. Could they genuinely put something together in the UN to try and overthrow an elected leader?
They can try, but I'm not too optimistic. I've never had a whole lot of confidence in the UN. I used to think it was that we didn't get a fair shake because we didn't have all the votes, but we have all the money, and so we can pressure people into supporting things, just like we can get NATO to support us in doing things because we have the money and we run the show. So if the UN, as it exists now, is offering a place for discussion and moving toward a peaceful solution, I'm not going to oppose that, but I don't have that much confidence in the United Nations. To me, that's a world government, and it's just who controls the government. It's just like domestically, who controls the government? Who's controlling the government of Venezuela? So I don't think that's the solution, but I have nothing opposed to, two sides sitting down and using that as a forum, and hope some good comes of it.
You please correct me if I'm wrong. I always understood that diplomats or people in embassies in a country were there at the invitation of that host nation. Venezuela decided it didn't want to host US diplomats anymore. It said that they need to leave, and the US diplomats refused to go. What did you make of that? I understand they are now actually going to go, but they said that they were going to stay where they were, like some kind of political squatters. What did you make of that?
Well, they were trying to enforce the declaration made by Bolton and these other ones that Maduro is not the government anymore. It's his hand-picked Guaido. He's the government, so therefore he doesn't have the authority, and that would, emphasize and make the point that he is no longer in charge. I think the fact that the embassy, the personnel is leaving, I think it's very, very good because under these circumstances, we're supposed to follow, the person that looks like the best person to represent that government. But those are side issues. I think the big issue is how the conflict in Venezuela is resolved. And I can't avoid always going back to economic crises that contribute so much. So that the people there, I'm sure, are pretty darn unhappy with the crisis going on. And so if you do it superficially, or if you do it at the UN, or you force people to do something and they argue about who are we going to take directives from and whether or not we're going to close the embassy, that represents the debate going on, but it doesn't offer the solution.
Do you think if some countries said we don't recognize Donald Trump as the leader of the United States, we believe that it's Hillary Clinton, do you think maybe the US would think twice about these kind of actions?
Well, Hillary would be happy. She's been trying to say that he's not legitimate, and I think it's terrible that people won't, and he gets punished more than he should because of that. But I think if a foreign country did that and say, we're not going to listen to you because you're not the legitimate president of the United States, I think it would unify the people in the United States. 9/11 brought all factions together because it was seen as an attack from outside. And so I think that is what would happen, because they would highly resent it, but they never turn it around and say, well, if we don't like it, why should we expect other nations to like what we tell them and the government that we're going to accept? And if we don't like what they have, we're going to change it for them. That's the part that so many people never ask.
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe they should. Appreciate your time, Ron. Always a pleasure to speak to you. Former US presidential candidate and Congressman Ron Paul.